What's up, man?
How's it going?
Trying to give you something interesting to look at. I'm assuming you want my face as much as possible.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That's actually a cool background.
I mean, it's a real studio.
Yeah, I know. That's
No. Well, so when you said window, like I'm literally in a basement with no window. Well, I got a very small, those old like 70s style, like block windows.
okay.
I've got two of those for just a tiny bit of natural light, but I store a bunch of camp gear and music gear behind these curtains. So
Yeah.
they're not as aesthetically pleasing. So
No, it's cool. I mean, it's pretty standard for you to have a studio in the kind of like that dark and moody kind of setup. So I wouldn't have expected you to have crazy lights or anything.
The interesting, like different strokes for different folks. Like I know a lot of people prefer a lot of natural light.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree. Like if I had a writing room for writing music, I may be a little more inclined for something like that. But like for me, I kind of prefer to just remove everything and immerse myself in a song.
Yeah.
So for me, it's focus. I feel focused in a room like this,
Right, because it's just your console and what you're seeing, what you're hearing.
I'm looking for inspiration within the song, not necessarily from the outside world.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
We can totally get into that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I guess just to recap, we met in Florida, going to a technical school called Full Sail to learn audio engineering, music business. And we weren't in the same class. We were kind of like right in the same kind of, because it's each month, right? It was different classes, basically. Yeah. The one right before or whatever. And I don't know if you remember exactly how we met, but I could tell you were one of those that was like, okay, this guy's legit. Because, I don't know, do you remember how we met? I have the story in my head.
I don't remember the specifics. But I do agree with you. It was pretty obvious to me within the first 2 months of being at that school, like the people who were doing things kind of gravitated toward each other. But go ahead and tell that story. I'll probably remember it, but I can't.
I mean, this is my version. Obviously, we're 15, 16 years removed. But I think at some point, whether it was like the school's internal like message board, or it could be Craigslist. I don't know. Shout outs to Craigslist. It's either I posted something of like wanted to jam with musicians or something.
Oh, yeah.
So somehow we got connected, and I remember you invited me over to your place.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was an apartment or a house.
It was a house, and I had my drums set up.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember walking in with my roommate John, who also played acoustic guitar. Because what we were going to do was just like play some of our songs and see how we like.
Dude, I totally forgot all about that.
I know. That's how we met. And I remember walking into your house and walking into your studio room. And this room, like it looked like a normal house. And then you walk in and it looks exactly like what you see in the background. And I'm like, at the time I was 19, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, who is this guy? This guy has a whole studio set. I'm over here playing around with like a little microphone or whatever. And that's when I knew, this guy takes it seriously. Like he knows his stuff already. So that's kind of cool to hear back now that you've been doing it for a while, but you wanted to keep growing that thing.
Correct. Yeah. And what you saw when you walked in was a collection of gear over like the previous 20 years. So I kind of did it backwards, where I had, in my hometown in Indiana, I had been running a studio for over 10 years already.
Okay.
And, through some life events, I just decided like, hey man, like if I really want to do this, I probably should get an education. Mm-hmm. And for me, I had been doing it. I knew I didn't know everything. But like for me, I wanted to get a little more business chops, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I felt like I had talent. I had the ability to make records, but I just didn't know how to like make a business out of it.
Okay. Yeah.
So just moved to Florida and went back to school and loved every minute of it. And met some good friends there, like
Yeah.
you, and we have a couple of mutual friends too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was probably for me like a decided moment where I was like, where I had just kind of been like dabbling in music production. Having a studio in a cornfield in Indiana,
Yeah.
you can't just do one thing.
Right.
To survive doing music, I was playing in bands. I was producing records. I was mixing records. I was running sound at my church, like playing at my church, all these things just to make ends meet. But I think, going back to school and then eventually moving here to Nashville, it was all part of just trying to figure out where I fit in the whole music production environment. And, I remember early on, like having bands in the studio was great, but I almost like I couldn't wait for the band to leave so I could just like dive into the song and make something of it, like.
So that's your home base is like
from the beginning. And so, I was always just thinking like, how can I just mix? How can I get to that point? Because like I knew people were doing it. Like I had met some people that were doing it, and for me, like moving to Nashville was like kind of that end goal of like, okay, if I want to do this one thing and be great at one thing, I have to go to where there are other people trying to do that as well.
Yeah.
People who just want to play drums, people who just want to produce records, people who just want to master, like, and being like trying to find a community that I can like, be a part of and help even develop,
Right.
So yeah, like, going to school was, a huge leg up and just kind of discovering who I was and making some friends along the way who some of those are still there. But then also just moving to a place where you can be enabled to do that one thing that you feel like you're really good at.
I think that seems like the better way to do it because you knew there's something about when you're older, knowing what you're passionate about versus me when I was younger, guessing what my passions were, hearing you knowing you've already had time in the industry, but there was something that you knew that you wanted to learn more about the business side. I feel like you have a better sense that you're in the right place. Did you always know you were in the right place when you moved to Florida?
Yeah. And I think for me, it was just that I knew music was what I wanted to do, but I was just trying to find my niche, like because there's multiple things you could be doing, like from the business standpoint to marketing to law to, touring to, there's so many different things. And I had an idea, like what I said, like I always enjoyed mixing, but I just was trying to figure out, okay, how do I first of all be profitable doing this, and be able to support a family, but also just do the one thing. Full Sail is an expensive school.
Yeah.
To go to mess around to try to figure out what you want to do.
Sure. Yeah. I've always been torn about even talking about my experience at Full Sail because I never want someone to not go because of my opinions on it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, once you start attaching finances into it, it becomes really difficult.
I loved it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I don't think you need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for an education. If you're determined, like, it's interesting, like, because, I'm now, in my mid 40s and I've been doing this I've been in Nashville for 10 years now. And I do get hit up every now and then for like an internship or can somebody come sit in? And, I'm always willing to take a phone call and like kind of hear out, but pretty quickly I can tell whether or not this person has what it takes. And it's not necessarily about how much it's almost more about how willing to learn you are.
Yeah.
And because, there's a whole collegiate system around how to do this, right? Like you can go to school to learn, but the thing is, like, there are no rules. There's no one way to do it. Like I have a group of friends who are mix guys here. We got a text thread, and we're just constantly like talking about things, and it just amazes me how many people are making a living telling you this is the way to do it, when it's like, that's not the way I do it.
Yeah.
But I'm making a living doing this, Sure. So it's, that's an interesting dichotomy there of like, I don't know, there's no rules, man. And if you're willing to learn and willing to put in the hours to develop your own path of getting, the same results, what are we looking for? We're looking for something that sounds great, that moves people, that, has hopefully a lot of the distractions removed. But yeah, it's like there's more than one way to get that.
Yeah. Actually, I like the way you put that, and I need to reframe my experience in that when I was there, I dove in like 100%. And like you said, it wasn't about what you knew, it's the posture that you had about learning.
Absolutely.
Yep. What I learned there maybe not applicable as far as like the actual technical skill that I am doing at my job, but the capacity to like learn quickly, the capacity to adjust on the go, all those things I've taken into whatever I'm doing. Even like a little thing like this, like even just knowing signal chain, you'd be surprised how many people don't know signal chain. It's wild. You take it for granted because it's something that you've been formally taught. And some people know that the knob turns this, but they don't know the behind what really goes into it. So there's something to be said about that. What's interesting too is we were there around 08, 09, right? Like it was 08, 09, 2010 or something. That was an interesting time for music and kind of the recording industry in that we were in this transition point between analog and digital.
Yeah.
I remember my class was like one of the last classes to like be taught on tape, like recording.
Yeah,
on tape.
I was going to ask if you got to do tape, because I know we were too. Like,
yeah, we were like in that last kind of the dying breed. Yeah. But what's funny is now it's coming back, right? I'm sure the tape kind of revolution is coming back to like the teachings. How much have you had to adjust as far as like the analog versus digital kind of space? Like, where do you live in that?
That's a cool concept too. So moving here, like, I had a good amount of analog gear, mostly like preamps, but I had like like an LA2A, like just a couple of like cool pieces. And, some of the people I met early on were doing kind of this, we weren't using tape, but we were doing this hybrid workflow where you'd use some sort of analog summing device.
Okay.
So, everything, you'd mix in Pro Tools, but everything would come out and go through like a 16 channel mixer, and then you'd spit it back into like for me, that was a Dangerous Music 2-bus LT or something like that. And then like an API and, a back CQ and like all this expensive stuff into like Burl converters were big back then. But I did that for a few years, and it just in a lot of ways felt super restrictive because you couldn't really change your 2-bus because of recall. Like it was mess. And I tried different approaches to that, and a lot of guys actually don't change their 2-bus, but I don't anymore. But all is to say, I was still trying to figure some things out, and recall was always just a mess, and even on inserts and stuff like that. But, I figured out a way if I was going to, or whatever, I would print it right away. Like I'd dial in something and I'd just record it back to Pro Tools and be done with it. So I didn't have to recall it. But I loved that workflow, but like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, what is it that I like about this?
Okay.
And for me, it wasn't the sound, because plugins, to be honest, to me, like sound better. Like, I have nice converters.
Sure.
I have nice converters. I have some like an Apogee Symphony IO, but there's something just convenient about plugins and only having noise if you want noise. Like, so for me, it wasn't sonic. What I figured out is I liked touching knobs, and I liked the whole process of because I think something happens when you take your hands off the mouse, you reach for a knob, all this a little more intensely, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And rather than trying to keep a mouse on a knob, like reaching up and grabbing a knob and turning a knob and having a 1-for-1 or 1-to-1 ratio of doing this makes it sound like that. So I had surfaces for a while, the Euphonics surfaces back in the day, and those were good, but they were pretty lacking. But like, you know, when like the Avid S1 and the Dock came out, like I jumped on those immediately, and they have been phenomenal. Like if you take the time to dial them in and set them up the way that you want them, like my workflow is such right now that it is such a joy to like even the menial task, you know, of prepping sessions is pretty automated. Like, okay. And that's a whole nother discussion, like too, sure. With, you know, dialing in macros and different things to help those menial tasks go a lot quicker. And, but also like the interesting thing about developing your workflow or whatever is like, you know, it's not only getting the job done quickly, but getting it done in a predictable way where you don't miss anything. Does that make sense? Like if you, so like my workflow with the song, like it's pretty much the same thing every time, but I can quickly touch every part of a song, even if it's 100+ tracks. Wow. I can get through that quickly and efficiently and know that I haven't missed anything.
And did you create this own workflow? Like, does everybody in this kind of like whatever you're doing, do they have their own macros, or do we share? Like, do you share your?
Yeah, I mean, some people have assistants that do stuff like that, and I did for a while. Mm-hmm. But my assistant that I had early on, like, moved on and is doing like producing and mixing on his own. So I had to figure out. You know, I was like, do I look for somebody else, or do I just, you know, invest in myself in making that process? So I, you know, have a friend here in town who was using a lot of macros pretty heavily, and I'm not a coder, so a lot of this stuff uses like some Java and stuff like that. But I found this app called SoundFlow that is phenomenal. They have a bunch of pre-built like blocks of code that you can put together. Oh wow! And if you can't get what you want, like you can post for help, like, and they have coders on hand that can help you customize things. And
is that just like an extension that you can add to Pro Tools or Logic?
Yeah, so it's an app that runs in the background, and there is a free version actually that you can get with your Pro Tools subscription. Like I just have a little iPad off to the side that has a bunch of buttons that I push that will quickly like move tracks into certain groups and folders, color code them, recall a preset, like effects chains, all this stuff.
Yeah, actually, and walk me through that. So you have this program that you can create almost like multiple quick keys, quick setups all at the same time. And you're saying that like if you had 100-track session, like walk me through a couple of the things that you could do within like a couple button presses.
So, I mean, simple thing is like creating a new session. Typically, a session will come to me, everything will be in a folder. There'll be the song title, tempo, and then that folder will contain multi-tracks, right? Mm-hmm. So for me to create a new session, type out the name of that session, save it where I want to save it, and then go in and dial in the tempo, then import tracks, right? That's a very manual, tedious process that is repeated over and over. So now I just highlight the incoming folder. I hit new session. It'll name the session, like save it where I want it to be saved. It'll grab the tempo information, change the tempo information, and then it will direct back to that folder to import the files. And it'll stop there so that I can confirm and pick whatever files. And then I click OK, and it'll continue to import everything.
That is huge.
Dude, it does save me time, but even if it didn't, it saves me joy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like at the end of the day, less mouse clicks for me and less typing is just
music. It's music. It might as well be music.
You get there faster. And then, you know, so now at this point, like all my tracks are at the bottom of the session. And I have I already have predefined folders, like subgroups that I put everything in.
Yeah.
So now I just have to go through and like I'll grab all the drums and I'll hit the drums button. It'll take them up to the drum folder, right? And it will put them in that folder. It'll recall a preset, which is like all your routing and all the effects and everything.
Oh, wow.
Then it will scroll back down. So now I can pick the next group, do the same thing, all the percussion stuff goes back down, grab all my guitars, so prep.
Much more pleasant experience.
Much more.
I was listening to, it was kind of like a business lecture where they were talking about scaling.
Mm-hmm.
And, to scale, like the best way to scale is to find ways to automate processes and to reduce what they call the cognitive load. And I
That's
think
exactly it.
That's what I'm hearing. And what I'm observing is in the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about your physical space in that some people like really bright spaces, but you like the dark, kind of more moodier tone in that when you sit down and you go to work, the focus is on the music and what you're doing. And
Yes.
It seems like it's the same exact thing with the macros and like the automation process. It allows you to not be bogged down with all of the little menial tasks that you've done them before, right? Like you've put in the time. You deserve to just be like, if the technology is out there, you have it, and now that cognitive load is taken off of your plate, and it gives you more bandwidth to focus on the actual work.
Yeah, and especially like where I'm at now in my career, like I'm doing around 80 songs a month for sync licensing, like what they call micro licensing.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, probably about 2 records a month. So, if you can differentiate those two, like the stuff for sync, it's mostly just instrumental.
Yeah. When you say sync, are you talking about like background music for film
like YouTube videos? Like there's companies here in town that their whole focus is just building a library, which then people can subscribe to that library.
Oh, it's like Epidemic Sounds,
Epidemic, Artlist.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of different ones. So
you're mixing those tracks?
Not all of it. Not for those companies. There's a couple of different
distributors
avenues.
Type. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that was one of the biggest needs for me to get my workflow in check, because they pay fairly, but they don't pay the full rate because it's a bulk type thing.
Yeah.
And it's the same on the composer side, because they're not looking for a produced record. They're looking for, it's kind of its own niche, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I never thought about this. So for companies, for those services like Epidemic, so when tracks get uploaded into that, it's not just like artists who want to send like their tracks to be put as a royalty thing. You get actual like sent stems and tracks and stuff like that to mix.
Correct. But what companies will do is there's different ways, like they'll even have a contract for a composer to do 5 or 6 songs a month. So that composer will do it, but a lot of times the mixing is done internally. Or in my case, a company has subcontracted me to mix X amount of songs a month. So they're buying the songs, and the composer sends the multi-tracks to the company, and then the company distributes to a couple of different guys then mix it. And it lets them kind of police the quality.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was just like, people submitting crap.
yeah, because a lot of the early ones, I don't know how everybody does it, but I think Music Bed, it's kind of a bit of a crapshoot, with what you get, because everybody's doing their own thing and you have to mix it as well. But by having just a small select group of guys mixing it that understand what's going on, you can get a lot of consistency and a lot better quality out of those tracks.
Do you have some sort of, do you have full autonomy to mix the way you want it, or do they have criteria in how?
Yes, I do. Yep. Which is it's wonderful.
Okay.
There's no revisions. There's no back and forth with the composer. Wow. It's just, it comes to us, mix it. And that's the thing, you talk about this is even another topic, moving to Nashville, coming from being a big fish in a small pond, now all of a sudden I'm this tiny fish in this big pond. It took probably 6 years for me to get any sort of confidence. But developing your workflow, like what I had, like that was part of me getting that confidence and knowing it's like, when is a mix done? When is it done? It's like, there's a point where it doesn't get better. It just gets different. And I think,
I love that.
Yeah. It's like,
it's so true.
Recognizing that point of like, okay, I have done enough that this sounds like this track should be on the radio. Like there's no, and beyond that, you're just kind of wasting your time.
Yeah. I have this Post-it note with a couple of questions. And one of them is, how do you know when it's done?
It's never
how did
done.
How did you get that to that point where, yes, it's never done, right? Like you could always tweak it, but how could you tell when it's at a point where you could submit?
I mean, a lot of time, so a rough mix is essential. Having a rough mix at least lets you know where the person left off, right? And for me, like, I don't look at mixing as I'm hoping that they sent me kind of where they left off, burned into the tracks for the most part. Okay. I'm not one of these guys that's like, send me raw tracks.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to start from zero, like kick drum up first, I can't remember the last time I EQ'd a kick drum, to be honest. Like, for me, it's more about the collective. I want to collaborate and kind of like pick up where the composer or where the artist or the producer left off.
Sure.
And take it over the finish line.
Yeah.
So, and my goal is that the track doesn't need mastering. Yeah, it's nice on a record to have somebody master, especially the way that records are recorded nowadays, where, it may be a record is like a collection of singles that the artist has released over the last year.
Yeah.
So having somebody go back and master that stuff just to make it sound like a record,
consistent,
and then, re-releasing that on Spotify or, wherever is a good idea. I don't want to start from zero. Like, I don't want to, even like drum samples, like, send me the stuff that you like. Like, I got stuff, that's fine. I'll use mine, but like I'm not here to produce the track, And I think that, like, the mixing role has changed a little bit in that, like, the whole old school thing was like the mixers had very specific tools that the producers didn't have. So when it would go to mix, you would expect almost like more production in a way. Like, but nowadays it's like the producers have all these mixing tools. They have the same tools that we do. So they're doing a lot of the mixing along the way. And I think that there's value to what, and, I'll be the first, like, if somebody sends me a track and, like, they got stuff burned into the vocals that I'm like, man, this just does not work. Like, just reach out. Like, hey, can you send me a raw vocal?
Right.
A raw tuned vocal. I don't want to tune it.
Yeah. Wow. So your viewpoint on it is more of a collaborative process in that you're trusting that someone like the work that's being done before it gets to you still has the spirit of what it's trying to be, and you're just trying to get it to that, like you said, the finish line.
I look at my job as like, a great production should arrive to me like 85 to 95% or 90% done. If that makes sense. Yeah.
If they didn't, something went wrong, right? Like, if it comes to you and it's just like hot garbage, you're like, how am I supposed to work with this?
Exactly. Yeah. And, the advantage, like most producers they can mix their own tracks, but just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. It's always this trade-off of like your time value. Like, is your time more valuable being spent producing another track or tweaking the last bit of these, you know what I mean? To recognize, as an artist or a producer, like, hey, I should be writing more music. I should be recording more music, and just, handing it off to somebody to do that, to take it over the finish line, I think is just, it's so wise. And I know budgets are constrictive and stuff like that, but it's the same thing. It's like, I can master your track too, but should I? No, my time is better spent doing more mixing. And it's like sending your song that you've been working on for a year to a mix engineer who can, spend a couple of hours on it and have it sounding phenomenal, because that's what I do every day, all day. Yeah. Like, it it's, my goal is not to be fast, but that just happens when you do it over and over. Like,
yeah, that's what experience brings you.
Yeah. You can quickly just recognize what needs to be done, and a few adjustments here and there. Mostly gain staging. Like, mix engineers probably don't want you to know this, but like, mixing is mostly just gain staging. I had a discussion with a friend the other day, and that came up, and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's pretty much it. Just making sure nothing is obnoxiously out of control, and just gain staging it through your two bus, doing some creative moves and making it sound like it's in the same world,
Okay.
Like, you're just creating this world that exists. Like, a song is a world, and it has to, like, you don't have to use the same reverb on everything, as long as it sounds like it's in the same world, if that makes sense.
Okay. So when an artist brings you this piece that's 80, 90%, what sort of things, like, what kind of magic do you add to that 10%? Is it strictly the gain staging? Like, what would you say you add to the collaboration in that final 10% to make it that really great thing?
It's hard to put your finger on it. Like, I'm a big faders guy, right? So to me, like, always the first thing that I approach is like balance. And I have things built into my templates, like VCAs, that, once I get stuff in those groups, organized in the groups, I can like very quickly get a rough balance. And I'm very adamant on that first 20 minutes, because just the way your ears work, like stuff kind of like sonically gets burned into your ears. So like, first impressions are everything.
Wow. Okay.
And this also adds to that thing that I was talking about, where like sending it off to somebody, and like, I love having people master the record. I mean, certain people, not everyone. I've gotten bad masters, but having that extra set of ears, because after about 20-30 minutes, no matter what the balance is like, things begin to sound okay to you.
Whoa.
So you start, it's losing perspective. So,
and by balance, do you mean levels of gain, or like spatial, or everything?
Just everything. Like,
okay.
I mean, one of the most critical balances obviously is like low end, like how much low end you have, and that balance between kick drum and bass guitar. But if you leave too much low end in there for that first 30 minutes, like, you get used to it, and you're going to send a mix that just has way too much low end. And even at different decibel levels, how differently you hear. And I basically only listen at two different levels. Like, I have my entire studio calibrated to supposedly 83 dB is where you hear the most linearly, but I think that's way too loud. Like, 80 dB is where I'm at, and then 10 dB less. That's the only two levels that I listen at. And I don't do headphones either. Well, I say that. I don't reference headphones. When I'm in my studio, I mix on one set of speakers, no headphones, no second guessing, and I send it, man.
And what does the two different levels get you?
For me, like, so I initially start off, like, I try to get things like pumping, get them kind of the loudest that they're going to be first, and then after that 20 or 30 minutes, I turn it down. And perspective, again, we're talking about perspective, it shifts your perspective, because your ears hear differently. But I think you can hear, it's a lot easier for me in my room to get the low end right when it's loud, but it's a lot easier to hear kind of like your snare vocal levels at the quieter volume.
How often are you in listening mode going, oh, I should change that, and I'm gonna go back and change it and rebalance?
Well, there again, it's the whole thing. It's like, well, yeah, I could change that, but also, at this point, the artist has approved it. The label's approved it. Like, it's approved. So it's like, yeah, is what I'm hearing now, is it going to make a difference on whether the record sells or not? Probably not at that point. So
almost like there's almost like a level of trust in your experience that, like,
right.
Whenever I made that initial move, it was made intentionally.
Yeah,
there's
nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
And just because I can make a change doesn't mean I should. So
yeah. And I'll tell you, that's a mindset that is someone that mixes 80, 90 tracks a month or whatever you said it was.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, even with myself, when I used to make a lot, I just sit there for hours, listening to the same thing over and over and over and over, and like, okay, I'm gonna go listen in my car now. Oh, something's got to change, and then it's just that experience that you have. There's a trust there that maybe someone who doesn't have as much experience have to keep going back and forth with.
Yeah, well, and it's like this with all forms of art, I think, where there comes a point where what you're working on has more value being out there than it does sticking around for another month worth of tweaks and revisions.
Ooh, I love
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, and I have friends that have sat on fantastic songs for years, and like, get it out there. Like, I think there comes a point in your career and in your growth as an artist or in tech or whatever, like, where you won't get better until you start putting stuff out there. Like, that's part of the process. You have to put it out in the real world and see what a real world reaction is to what you're doing and what you're contributing.
That's a beautiful segue, and we'll wrap it up with this, right? So I have one more question for you. I've been sharing a video with a couple of friends of mine of this concept called the gap, and it's the idea of when someone has this feeling of like, what I want to achieve, for some reason I can't reach it. My skill level or my taste is right here, but what I want is up here somewhere. And the question is like, how do I close that gap? And the person that was speaking about this concept called the gap is Ira Glass, and his take on it was the only way to close the gap is to put in a high volume of work for you to be able to like start creeping up to like your expectation of what your work is, the quality that it needs to be, that you strive for it to be, is the only thing to do it. The only way to get there is to just keep doing the work, and hopefully you start getting closer to it. Have you experienced that? And then also, like, what sort of things that you see in yourself are you going, I need to get better at that? How do I get to this level now?
I would absolutely agree with that. Because thinking back on my career, there were two kind of points in time where I felt like I made pretty large leaps in experience and confidence and skill. And, one of those was like pre-Nashville. I had mentioned I did sound at a mega church in my hometown, and they eventually asked me to start like producing their online service, like doing post-production on that. And having something consistent like that, where it's kind of the same thing, but every week is a chance to improve on it. That was a huge leap forward, and that gave me a huge boost of confidence, like for a couple of years right before I moved to Nashville. But also like a couple of years ago when I, started doing the sync work, where it was more like volume, having to work through a large amount of tracks, like you just can't help but get better. Like,
yeah, you could probably do it in your sleep. That's how how much work and the repetition helps.
And I would, I'd recommend for anybody wanting to do something, like try to find some sort of position that you can get those reps in, like, and don't be so hung up on your past work, where, or thinking that it's not good enough. Just put it out there, move on.
Yeah.
Put the next record out, move on. Like, and what's interesting about that is like, that puts that's a healthy perspective of like, okay, what I'm working on now, I'm going to put my best foot forward, but it's probably not the best record that I'm ever going to do. Like just, because if you're doing it over and over, you're every record, you're learning something new. Every new record is a chance to improve on the last one. But the interesting thing is like in your mind, when you come back to those things, like, oh, we put that out there, it wasn't my best or whatever. Like, sometimes you're pleasantly surprised when you go back and listen to something from like 5 years ago.
Like,
you're like,
wow.
I did
that? Yeah?
Yeah, and then like I've even opened up sessions like, what did I do here? Like, why? That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so then you go question your entire existence and be like, am I getting better? I don't know.
Am I getting worse? Right, yeah. That's true. And so like from a gap perspective currently, is there a thing in your workflow or even like the way you're mixing? Is there something that you're still trying to crack? Like, I'm trying to crack the code on this and I'm slowly getting there, but still work needs to be done on it.
Not that I've arrived by any means, but I think what I've realized is if I don't know how to do something, I can spend enough time on it to figure it out. I think just developing the confidence that like you can do it. It just may take a little more time to figure things out. And I guess as far as like Gap, you know, what is the end game? Like for me, I like to think about the life that I want to live and kind of work my way backwards from there. And what do I need to do today to live that life? And for me, like, I like freedom. I like working for myself. I like spending time with my family. I like picking my kids and dropping them off from school. So for me, it's like, that's where I'm headed. And that Gap is actually it's not that far away, because with that in mind, like, what do I need to do to get to that point, you know? And that's what I'm doing. And I don't know, as far as like skill wise, career wise, like, I don't know, like, I want to work with Taylor Swift one day, you know, like, I would love to work with a major artist someday. And I've had some opportunities here and there to be parts of records and different capacities, but yeah, it's like,
I love hearing your perspective in your most important thing about like just life in general, or even your creative work, is to have a life that you're happy with. You mentioned your family first, and it's, you're happy with the work that you're doing, but at the end of the day, you're doing the work that you're doing because you're passionate about it. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to come home to your family and enjoy it, essentially. That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Dude, time flew by. Lynn, I really appreciate your time. I'm glad that after 15, 16 years, we're like chatting again and all that stuff. So
I hope you have some useful stuff.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be awesome. And I don't know, maybe next time. I saw that you were into Jeeps and off-roading.
Oh yeah. A little labor of love for me. So
yeah, I know nothing about it, but I would love to learn at some point. So I'm sure I'll reach out and we can chat about that.
Let's do it again, man.
Cool. All right, dude. So I'm going to press stop real quick.
Sounds good.